Okay, so we have the CEO of Intel, Patrick Gelsinger. Let me give a brief introduction to Patrick. He is from the Pennsylvania area, finished high school there, and then went across the country and joined Intel right after he graduated from high school. And then while he was working at Intel, got an undergraduate degree from Santa Clara in electrical engineering, then got a master's degree in electrical engineering and computer science from Stanford, and then stayed at Intel to become the youngest vice president at Intel and also the first chief technology officer of Intel. And while there, designed one of their most famous microprocessors. And he was there for 30 years and then was recruited away to become the president and chief operating officer of EMC. Did that for a number of years. And then he became in 2012 the CEO of Vmware, where he tripled the revenues and tripled the market value. And then was recruited back to be the CEO of Intel in February of this year. And Intel, as you probably know, is one of the legendary semiconductor companies. It's a company with about 110,000 employees. It has a market capitalization now about $210 billion and a revenue of about $77, $78 billion, something like that.
Close enough.
Okay, so we keep reading about semiconductor shortages. Why all of a sudden? Is it because of COVID? Why are we having a hard time getting semiconductors into this country?
Yeah, what's happened is COVID really was the impetus where all of a sudden, the demand, in the semiconductor industry, about $500 billion, and it was growing about 5% per year. COVID drove that to 20+% per year, which on an industry that size, wow, right? But supply chains got disrupted, so supply went negative. And all of a sudden, what was probably going to be a little bit of a shortage became a gulf. And now every industry has been disrupted. Auto industries, hey, I can't ship, F-150s because of a $2 chip. My $10 billion, train project is stopped because of a few chips. All of a sudden, it's become a crisis across every industry, and every one of us. Never has semiconductors been as sexy, as cool, and important as it is now.
Okay, well, let's go back for a moment for people who may not be as technologically savvy as I am. So what actually is a semiconductor and who invented that?
Yeah, so the idea of semiconductors, right, is this ability to essentially do chips, little transistors turning on and off, and you put them together and it becomes microprocessors and memories that store things. And this idea was actually emanated out of Bell Labs. But Intel was really one of the key companies to push this forward. 50 years ago, last month, we celebrated the microprocessor. And this was the idea that we could actually create a programmable thing that did what we told it to do. And we could start writing software for it. And rather than these big computers like IBM mainframes, all of a sudden they were tiny things. And 50 years ago, the microprocessor began. And now they're everywhere. They're in light switches. They're in your Alexas. They're in your pocket. And this idea has now.
Who invented the semiconductors? Is that William Shockley or
William Shockley, AT&T, and the microprocessor was invented by Intel.
Okay, so William Shockley, for those who don't know, won a Nobel Prize. He ultimately was seen as a racist by many people. Had certain eugenics theories that were, let's say, ridiculous. And then he had a number of great scientists and computer people working for him, Robert Noyce, Gordon Moore. And one day they just picked up and said, we're out of here. And they started their new company with something called venture capital, which was novel then.
Which at the time was a big deal, right? They were the traitorous eight when they left.
And it was 1968 that they started Intel?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, and where'd the name Intel come from?
Integrated electronics. Because the idea at the time was these transistors were discrete things. And Intel, Robert Noyce, invented the idea of an integrated circuit where you could have one piece of silicon with many transistors on it, right? And that was the great Intel innovation, and that became memory chips, that became eventually microprocessors.
Okay, so they built this company called Intel, and they were dominating the semiconductor business and the microprocessor business. When did it sort of depart from our shores and go offshore? When did that happen?
Yeah, and if we were here in 1990, Intel, the company that put silicon into Silicon Valley, this is an industry that we created, here on our shores. If we were here in 1990, 37% of manufacturing would have been done in the US. Even amazingly, 44% was done in Europe, right, as well. And today, US is 12% and Europe is 9%. And what we've seen is this has just drifted to Asia, largely for two reasons. One is the consolidation of supply chains. Clayton Christensen, rebar effect, building more and more integration of the supply chain in Asia for lower cost. And the Asian countries, Taiwan, Korea, China, have aggressively invested in incenting this industry to come to their shores. And it was never like Congress voted, let's get rid of the dirty semiconductor industry. It's that the Congresses of China, Korea, Taiwan, Japan said, let's bring this industry to our shores. And essentially it's 30 to 50% cheaper if I were running my manufacturing in those locations than if I was doing it in the US.
So a chip is made of silicon.
Silicon and a lot of other elements.
Where does silicon come from?
Silicon, sand, right?
The
most prevalent material on Earth is the magic, right, of silicon, right? And you can add all these different elements of the periodic table. You can get it to do all of these magic things. It was like God's gift to the digital age, silicon.
So in this iPhone, how many silicon chips are there? Probably
100 or so.
100. And what about in an average automobile? How many chips?
The good ones are a few hundred. The not so good design ones are maybe 1,000.
Okay. And then the electric cars, they have 2,000 or something?
Yeah, more. And today, a premium car today, about 4% of the bill of materials of a premium car today is semiconductor chips. And all the shortages are, for that 4%. Estimates, and I gave a big speech on this at the Munich Auto Show a couple of months ago, that by 2030, because of electrification and autonomous vehicles, that number is expected to be 20%, right? So essentially your car is becoming a computer with tires. 5x the amount of semiconductor products will be part of that, of the total bill of materials by 2030.
Okay, so if China were to invade Taiwan, which some people think might happen at some point, would that be bad for the silicon chip world because so many chips are being made in Taiwan?
Yeah, that would be very devastating to the world's supply chains. And clearly, part of our message, part of my message has been that we need a more balanced geographically and a more resilient supply chain. And that's just been so emphasized through the COVID shortages.
Now, the largest semiconductor company in the world now, is that a Taiwan Semiconductor?
No, the largest one is Samsung in Korea,
Okay.
and the second largest is Intel, and third largest is TSMC in Taiwan.
Okay, and how did they become so big in Taiwan? Is this really good at making chips, or what's?
They created a new business model called the foundry. And they said, we're not going to design chips, we're just going to manufacture them for everybody else. And Morris Chang, the leader, and he had this, he's sort of like the Fred Smith of FedEx. He had this idea, right, that he drove very aggressively. And I'll say in Taiwanese history, the most important person, Chiang Kai-shek, second most important person, Morris Chang. When he drove this aggressively, he got some very strong support, from the Taiwan government. The foundry industry, they perfected that business model, and now Apple and Nvidia and Qualcomm, many other companies who don't manufacture their chips, right, they use TSMC to be their manufacturing partner.
Well, let's talk about that. Intel manufactures chips and you design them.
Yes.
Some companies only design them.
Yep.
For the biggest company market cap in the chip world in the United States is NVIDIA, right? With like a $700 billion market cap. They only design chips, is that right?
Yes.
Why don't you just design chips? It's a better business, isn't it?
Well, we believe that this idea of being an integrated design and manufacturer can be, and again, will be a superior business model if we execute it well. The world needs multiple foundries, and we're committed to now, Intel before only designed and manufactured our chips. I've changed that strategy, and somewhat like Microsoft, when they said, only our software runs, no, we're going to open up and we're going to run everything. And I've taken a very similar strategy to open up Intel, our fabs, our designs. We're going to open up to the industry, and I'm going to become an American foundry for the rest of the world's chips, as well as continuing to design our own chips.
But to build chips here costs more than building them in China or Taiwan. So aren't you going to have more expensive chips that people won't buy then?
And that's exactly why we've been working with the US government to create what's called the CHIPS Act. And the CHIPS Act essentially levels the playing field with Taiwan and Korea, right? It creates an incentive structure that we believe, puts it about on par
Right.
with what Taiwan and Korea do today. And that passed the Senate back in June. It's now in the House, and been meeting with a lot of the House members and so on this week to help get that across the line, because we believe that will be a meaningful incentive. And if you think about this, if the economic structure is fairly even, a new fab for me is about $10 billion. The project that we just started in Arizona, $20 billion. If it's 40% cheaper to do that in Taiwan, that's $8 billion. I mean, these are big boy dollars, right, that we're talking about. And if the CHIPS Act helps to bring that back in par, the US has proven that our innovation might, clearly wins, but that's too big of a gap. That's why we've gone from 37% to 12%. That's why this industry has drifted there.
The members of the House say they're going to pass this at some point?
Yeah, their message this week is, we're a little bit of the normal, Washington legislative sausage making, but it's not an if, but a when it gets
So when
passed.
members of Congress tell you something, you believe it, right? It's not,
Absolutely. Have they ever lied?
not that I know of.
Yeah, okay, then I don't trust them.
Okay, so it's called the CHIPS Act. CHIPS is an acronym for something. How long did it take for somebody to come up with words that would make into chips? I don't know.
I'm sure there's some creative staffer that spent days
so it's a
on
CHIPS Act.
Yeah.
And then when the CHIPS Act passes, like a $52 billion. $52 billion. So if you build a facility, you go before somebody or another and you say, give me some money. Okay. And so I now read that Samsung is building a chip facility in Texas.
Yep.
And I think as the Taiwan Semiconductor is building one
is building one in Arizona.
In Arizona. So why would they be building them in the United States when it's cheaper to build them in their own countries?
Yeah, their customers are now saying, this situation is, geographically, our customers are looking for us to balance our supply chains around the world. We are too concentrated. In Taiwan, major drought issues this past year, right? They're running into talent limitations. They're running out of electricity. So they have their own geographic limitations, and their customers are saying, I want a more balanced supply chain around the world. And the CHIPS Act is, going to be available to them as well, which we certainly support. We believe it needs to be more beneficial to American companies. But we believe that, hey, a next TSMC or Samsung factory in the US is better than the next one being built in Asia.
But
we fully agree.
You were quoted in the press, maybe misquoted. I know the press sometimes gets things wrong, but
that's the only time it's ever happened.
But it said that you didn't think that the Taiwanese companies or the Korean companies should get participation in the CHIPS Act if they build something here. Is that correct or not?
I believe they should get supported by the CHIPS Act. I believe American companies with American IP should get more support from the CHIPS Act. But absolutely, we believe the next Asian company building a factory here is better than them building the next one in Asia. And similarly in Europe, we firmly believe there should be a more geographically supply chain that becomes more resilient. Semiconductors are so important to every aspect of humanity and becoming more important. God decided where the oil reserves are. Let's put the fabs where we want them, because the fabs are more important to the next couple of decades than where the oil reserves are. Let's put them where we want.
But you still think American companies should get some benefit over
Absolutely.
All right, so how would you get a benefit if they're going to get support from the CHIPS Act, the Taiwanese companies? How would the American companies get some benefit?
If they get $1, I should get more than $1.
In other words, if they get $1 billion to build a facility, you should get $2 billion or something.
Something like that. There clearly should be advantage.
Okay.
And I think that's politically correct. If I was going to Taiwan, I don't expect to get treated as good as TSMC does, right? I believe, that's part of national policy. Industrial policy should clearly be saying, what do we want? Do we want manufacturing in the US? Absolutely. Do we want the intellectual property, R&D, and manufacturing in the US? Even more so.
What about Europe? Are they in the game anymore?
We've spent a lot of time in Europe over the last 6 months as well, and they're proposing the equivalent of the CHIPS Act in Europe. And Ursula von der Leyen, president of the EU, Marguerite Vestager, Thierry Breton, two of the most important commissioners on technology issues. They are aggressively creating their CHIPS Act as we speak. And we've been engaging with them because we would hope to expand our footprint, not just in the US, but Europe as well.
In Asia, they don't need a CHIPS Act because they've had one for a long time.
Yeah, they did theirs 2.5 decades ago.
All right, I see. Now, for those who aren't again, as technologically savvy as I am, how do you actually design a semiconductor or a chip? I mean, how hard is that? Does it take an hour to do it, or how long does it take?
A major new microprocessor, one of our high-end chips is about a 4-year project.
4 years.
4 years, right, to do it. The architecture, right, it's all done in software on the computers now, the physical layout of it, the different components, you have to send it into manufacturing, get prototype tips. But that whole thing from, the first idea until volume production is about 4 years.
All right. So in, let's say, the sports world, somebody can be a great basketball player or a football player or a baseball player, or in the art world, you can be a great painter, great dancer, great singer. Can you be a great chip designer by yourself? Can somebody go into a room and say, stay away, I'm going to design a chip, you're not going to be involved? Or is it a team effort?
It's a team. Now, typically, and like I was the architect of the 8486, I was number one person on that. I laid out the initial concepts and so on, but then the team became about 150 people to design that chip. Today, these chips are much more complicated than that, much more sophisticated. My 486, my Mona Lisa was 1.2 million chips. Today, our most high-end chip is 100 billion transistors. And we project that we'll be doing a trillion transistor chip by the end of the decade. But today's design teams are maybe 500 or 600 people large.
So if somebody says, I want to be a chip designer, should they major in philosophy or history, or what kind of people are you looking for?
STEM.
That's it.
STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but also arts, right? And I'm very much a STEAM person, not a STEM person. Right, okay. Where it's very much about industrial design as well, and bringing those skills together. But it's much more the hard sciences.
So if you design a chip and it's on paper, you're designing, it looks great, but then you actually make it, it doesn't work. Does that ever happen?
It always happens. There's always some amount of debugging, testing, and manufacturing. Very rare does a major new design go into production on what we call the A step. But given all of this sophisticated simulation and emulation technology, some of which is done by Siemens as well, that whole process, you're getting very close, right? The first ones coming out are functional, and then you do a few tweaks, and then it goes into production, usually on a B or C stepping.
So we hear a lot now about the future being quantum computing. What is quantum computing, and will we live to see it in our lifetime?
Yeah, so the idea of quantum computing is, a transistor is a binary switch. It's on or off. It's a 1 or a 0. It's called digital logic. Well, quantum logic basically is a different effect. Rather than have an on or off transistor, it's the quantum effect. And there are certain problems that can be expressed in quantum terms far more effectively than in digital terms. And if we can get a quantum computer to work, those classes of problems will be much more powerfully solved on a quantum computer than on a digital computer. Now, the one that gets everybody excited is security problems, algorithms. Encryption is the one where quantum could, if we get them to be functional, stable, predictable at that level, quantum effects probably will allow us to solve encryption problems at, dramatically faster using quantum effects. There's also things like medical, biological things that are more probabilistic that are probably going to be much more effectively solved using a quantum computer. Today, the idea of a qubit versus a transistor, we're showing small qubit quantum computers today. We could, come to my lab, I'll show you a qubit in action, right? A real quantum effect. My expectation is about 2030 is when we'll see quantum supremacy. What does that mean? That means that we'll have a stable, predictable quantum computer that is reliably producing better results than a digital computer would, right, at scale. And that'll be the first moment that we're going to say quantum is here. But quantum ain't going to be anything that you're using regularly. It's going to be the special cloud data centers that you have, because it only needs to operate close to absolute zero.
I have this image in my mind.
So we just need to put this big honking refrigerator in your pocket for you to carry it around. And these refrigerators, are about 25 feet large, right, with all these things to create one little qubit as well. It's pretty cool stuff.
So the image I have in my mind is you have a bunch of chip designers sitting there. They're all Stanford or the equivalent educated. They're engineers and so forth, and they're virtually all men. Is that wrong?
At this point, there's been a lot of emphasis in the industry to improve the diversity. And, I've been on this for almost 30 years, that we need to improve the female population. They're half of humanity. Why don't we have half of them being engineers and get the creative? Today, the industry is about 26, 28% females. We have set our 2030 goal to be 40%. From where we are. Intel's now about 30%. So we're driving hard to improve the pipeline of females. Also, there's underrepresentation in the, African Americans, et cetera. So it's been way too white male dominated. We have to drive diversity in this industry significantly.
To get a job at Intel, if you're just graduating from a very good school, what do you have to do? You have to be an engineer. You have to be personable. Don't wear a tie. Whatever you have. What is it you have to do?
You have to be a good geek.
Really? Okay. So you have to really look weird or something.
You don't have to look weird, but you got to be a geek.
Okay.
The people that we're really looking for would be top engineering talent, bachelor's, master's, PhD, people who've really excelled in the STEM categories. Now, of course, we're a big company, so we hire finance people. We have a few marketing people. We have sales people. And the other thing is we do manufacturing. We have about 40,000 people doing manufacturing, and some of that's engineering, but a lot of that is technicians, operators on the manufacturing line. We train many of those. This is just a tremendously good, clean industry in that regard, where entry-level technicians like me, starting as a farm boy technician, right, and now becoming the CEO of one of the iconic companies of our age. Wow, how did that happen?
Let's talk about your farm boy background. You grew up where?
Pennsylvania.
But in a farm, or really?
It was a farm community between Reading and Hershey. If you went halfway, it was Robizonia. We lived 5 miles outside of Robizonia. So I said, when you got to nowhere, we were 5 more miles, right? All of my uncles are farmers. Was just back there seeing a number of them. We had, steers, we had horses, we had chickens, we had pigs, we had, corn.
Was that what your parents were? They were parents farmers, or what were they?
My dad was number 9. Part of my reason I'm here is he was number 9 of 10. And grandpa helped 1 through 8 get buy their own farms. My dad never had his own farm. So he worked with his siblings.
Okay.
So he never had his own farm. Had he had his farm, I would be a farmer today. Oldest son, I would go into farming.
So he worked on a farm, but you didn't live on a farm.
That's right.
Okay.
So we lived amongst all of our uncles' farms,
Okay.
and working.
So explain how you sort of graduated, but not completely graduated from high school. It's an unusual story. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I accidentally took a scholarship exam, ended up winning a scholarship. Wasn't supposed to take it until my senior year, took it in my junior year. So I ended up skipping my last year and a half of high school, getting my associate's degree. And then Intel came recruiting for technicians. So literally I graduated in June with my high school degree. In August with my 2-year, my associate's degree, Intel came recruiting. The guy, Ron Smith was his name. I was number 12 of people that he interviewed that day. And if you've ever done any interviewing like that, about number 10, you can't remember male from female. Well, I was number 12, right? And he wrote in this paper after interviewing me, he said, smart, aggressive, arrogant. He'll fit right in. So I got invited to interview in California, right? I had never been in an airplane, right? A free trip to the beaches of California. Sign me up, baby, right? So I took a free trip to California, but I promised my mom I'm never moving to California. They're crazy out there. They got cults and earthquakes and stuff, never possible. And next thing I know, I'm sucked into Intel as an 18-year-old technician, and they paid for my bachelor's, master's, and PhD.
How did you get a master's degree at Stanford while you're working? Isn't that a little tricky?
It's pretty crazy. They had a tuition reimbursement program where as long as I worked 30 hours, they'd pay for my full tuition. I'm a broke, cheap, poor farm boy. They paid for tuition. And so I was working at night and going to school during the day, did that for my bachelor's, did that for my master's. And then, another fun little story, I quit Intel working on my PhD program to, go full-time to finish my PhD, instead of working full-time, going to school full-time. And Andy Grove comes to me and he says, instead of going there and learning on the simulator, why don't you stay here and fly the jet? And he made me the 46 design manager when I was 20.
He was the CEO,
24-year-old, the famous Andy Grove of Silicon Valley. And he made me, the design manager of the 46 at 24 years old. Now, the amazing thing is there was nobody on the team younger than me. I'm the youngest person on the team, and I'm in charge of the most important chip in the industry of the age.
So when you met Andy Grove, you're working for him, and then Robert Noyce, Gordon Moore. Did you say they're not as smart as their reputation, or I'm smarter than them? What did you think?
Oh, they were stunning. They were just, Andy, intellectual integrity, strategic capacity. Seeing him and Bill Gates argue was like a masterpiece, right? As these two intellectual giants going head to head. Robert Noyce, Nobel Prize winner, integrated circuit, just stunning, creative capacity. Gordon Moore, Moore's Law. I just interviewed Gordon, 92 years old, living in Hawaii. Stunning individuals. And
what is Moore's? For those who don't know, Moore's Law is?
Moore's Law, he predicted the semiconductor industry future, saying that the number of transistors would double every 2 years, right? And if you do that over a couple of decades, that gets to be a really big number, 1.2 million to 100 billion, right? And
so what's Gelsinger's Law? You have a law?
Gelsinger's Law is we're going to keep doing Moore's Law.
Okay, all right, I got it. All right, so let's talk more about your background. So you work your way up, you become the youngest vice president, chief technology officer. So, and then you're there for how many years? 30 years. 30 years, and then you get recruited away. So was it hard to leave Intel?
Dreadfully hard. I thought I had written in my personal mission statement when I was in my mid-20s that I was going to become president and CEO of Intel. And, it was a crazy thing to say, this 20-year-old punk, right? But to me, it was sort of like, I'm going to work to make myself good enough that I could sit in the chair of Andy or Gordon. And so every time they would say something, I'd say, would have I said that? Could have I said that? It just became this constancy of, do I know enough? Have I learned enough? Am I good enough? Do I agree, for that journey? So leaving Intel, it was multiple years until I got over it. I still did the Intel bong, but dun, 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 every night, right? It was like, right. So very hard, but it also, when you're at a place for 30 years, there is no other, right? You don't know right from wrong. There's only that approach. And so leaving Intel was an extraordinary experience to learn a new culture, a sales-oriented culture versus an engineering and manufacturing one, learning the software industry, becoming a CEO. So now it really is 11 years and, coming back to be the CEO. By the way, 11 years is an interesting number to be away from a company. It's the same amount of time Jobs was away from Apple, right? Almost to the day. Right, from my time away from Intel.
So, but one of the things you did when you were away is you ran a company that I remember had gone public and got a lot of attention. Vmware when it went public, later bought by EMC. Mm-hmm. But what does Vmware do, and what did you do that dramatically increased its value?
Yeah, Vmware invented this idea of a hypervisor, another technical term, but it basically makes one hardware computer look like many software computers to applications. So all of a sudden, one server can look like 10 servers, and you walk into a data center and I'll take 10 servers and make them one. Wow, what a value proposition. They perfected that piece of software and then they parlayed it into a software enterprise business. And when I came in, essentially it was a one product company. I made it a one platform company, for networking, for storage, for management and automation. And we tripled the size of the company, more than tripled the market cap. And I made my friend Michael Dell a lot of money.
Michael Dell is the owner of EMC. And in fact, he did a leverage buyout of EMC, which VMware was part of. And you made him, let's say, $20 billion or so. Does he ever say thank you?
He's a very thankful guy.
Yes. Okay. So, all right. So you're running a VMware, and then all of a sudden somebody calls you and says, "Okay, now it's ready. You can come back and be CEO." Did you say, "I don't want you anymore. I'm very happy at VMware"?
Well, it was a little bit different than that because in Thanksgiving, just a year ago, I got a call. Would you join the board of Intel? So I go to Michael Dell and I said, "Michael, what do you think about me joining the board of Intel?" And Michael says, "They need help. Go help them." So I started interviewing for the board. So I interviewed for the month of December last year to join the board of Intel. I'm learning it, thinking about the strategy. I've been away from it for 11 years and so on, get my own strategic thoughts put together. And then December 23rd, an activists are starting to chew around the edges of Intel and, make some noise. And they said, "Would you consider being the CEO?" Ruined my Christmas holidays. Right. Linda and I, because it was one of these where, we just had our 8th grandchild, life is good. The company's good. We're about to take, and spin VMware out of Dell. I wasn't quite finished and so on. But the idea of going back to the company that I had written, almost 30 years ago to be the CEO of, is sort of like, wow. But doing that in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a global shortage, to turn around an icon, wow. Right. And, 3 weeks of chaos for my wife and I. And we agreed, because I view these things as, hey, if I'm making the decision, we are making the decision. And we made the decision to come back to be the CEO.
Now, you're a very hardworking guy, obviously very smart, but you've written a book about the importance of work-life balance.
Yeah.
So what is the work-life balance in your work life?
Yeah, right now there's not a lot. But the whole idea of work-life balance, I say, right, man of faith, right, God, family, work, that's the life priorities. And if you ever get it to be work, family, God, life ain't going to be good for a long time, right? Maybe good in the short time, but you have to live by those priorities. You have to set disciplined boundaries. You have to live like your priorities are your priorities, and your kids and your spouse and, those relationships. And, we did crazy things like, we talk about in the book about having an at-home chart, keeping score, right? And, and my secretary would produce the independent audited version of my at-home score, right? And give it to my wife each month and so on. All of these things to just keep you in track and keep in balance for your life. But it was always this, struggle. And any successful person is always fighting these, right, tensions of, the different aspects of living.
Now, let me ask you, when I'm not necessarily that tech savvy, obviously, but when my computer, when it doesn't kind of work the way it's supposed to, I, scream at it or something, or pound on it or something, or then call my tech people to ask me how to do it. What do? Do you ever have a problem getting your computer working? Do you scream at it, or you can fix it yourself?
Well, generally, I'm the technician to fix my computer, my wife's computer, my kid's computer, my grandkids' computer.
So you fix it, you can fix it.
Mostly, but now I'm so busy, I call the tech people too.
Okay. One time I couldn't work this iPhone. I was there and I was at a conference in China, and Tim Cook was on. I said, I can't work this thing. He says, David, I usually don't do tech support for other people, but I'll do it for you. So he fixed my iPhone. So that was pretty nice of him. So
I'll help you too as well.
Okay. So most CEOs, by the time they get to be CEO, they're fairly sanitized in terms of talking about their religious faith. Mm-hmm. And so you rarely can get a CEO really talking about their religious faith. They kind of avoid it. You're the opposite. You talk about it a great deal. You're very involved in Christianity and very involved in it. And you would say that's the most important thing in your life other than your family, I guess you would say. So can you explain why it's so important to you and how it has helped you be a successful business person?
Yeah. First, a little story. So I'm joined Intel, walking around the halls, starting to go to school, became a Christian at 18 years old, after I moved to California, and really, made that, firm religious view and spiritual decision. And then a few months later, I felt like God was calling me to become a full-time minister. And I started to argue with God. I don't want to be a minister. I want to design computers. I love this stuff and I'm good at it. Right. And, finally, there's a story in the Bible, Gideon, right, where he lays a fleece before God. If this happens, I'll do this. And so I laid a fleece before God. And the answer that came very clear to me was the workplace is your ministry. Right. And I'm here to be, a full, some become vocational ministers. I am here to be a full-time workplace minister. And, my CEO, right, God and Jesus Christ, and I'm going to do everything that I do in the workplace, to honor that calling. Now, when you go into the workplace, though, particularly now as a CEO, I need to be entirely diverse and inclusive. But I am now so aggressively diverse and inclusive. Diversity is easy, right? You just count the noses, one female, a Latino, a Black, so on. Okay, boom. Inclusion means, do you feel like you are all in when you're at the table, right? And now I go to the table and I say, I'm a Christian. Let me tell you about it, because I am bringing my whole self to the workplace. And I want you to bring your whole self too. Oh, you're a Sikh? Tell me about that. Oh, you're Indian? Well, what's this crazy Diwali thing? Anyway, I want to know all about that. When you just start become aggressively, intentionally diverse. And if you're reserved and saying, I'm not going to talk about anything that's really important to me, I can talk about the Washington team and why did you change it from the Redskins anyway, right? Or I can talk about my grandkids, but I can't talk about the most important thing to me. That's not inclusive, right? And in this, I say I have become aggressively diverse and inclusive. And as people understand that, and if we're, I'll say aggressively and intentional about respecting other people's faith, what's most important to them, it is game changing for how you think about that in the workplace. That's what's most important to me. I'm proud of it. And I wanted to know what's most important to you as well, in addition to getting this next chip done and getting the CHIPS Act approved and getting it done. And it becomes an outpouring of our philanthropic efforts as well.
So one of your sons came to you and said he wanted to be a pastor. You didn't say go into private equity, hedge funds, anything else. You said it's okay, even though he's not going to make any money, right?
Yeah, what I said to him when he laid that out, and he was really looking, and parents, you have the opportunity to bless your children, to honor them as they are moving into their professional career. And what I said to him, I said, the only currency that matters when we get to heaven is how many lives you have influenced for eternity. And I says, you will influence more lives for eternity than I did. Not only am I proud of you, son, but I couldn't imagine you picking a better career profession than becoming a minister.
So other than religion, outside of your work, you have some philanthropic interests. What are your main philanthropic interests?
Yeah, we could go on for quite a while. One of them is we began supporting our work in the poverty-stricken areas of Kenya. In particular, 200 kids in schools that we supported. Today, we're crossing 30,000 kids now in 25 schools in the slums of Kenya. And we set a goal to hit 100,000 kids by the end of the decade that are in our schools there. And these are, one of the kids now just graduated from Stanford with his bachelor's degree, coming from, less than 60 cents a week, right, in the slums of Kenya, is now graduating from one of the most prestigious institutions in the world.
So the man who built Taiwan Semiconductor is Morris Chang, you mentioned.
Yeah.
He's now 90 years old. And he said recently that you were too old to, right.
Good.
He said you were too old
We're ready
to lead Intel. You are 60 years old. So what did you say when you read that?
Well, first thing is bring it on, baby. But the second thing is, there was a policy in place that Intel had of required retirement at 65. And when one of our first board meetings, I came to the board of directors. The first thing, I don't want talent, to be pushed out of the company at 65. I have key people that, are doing great. I want to keep here. Secondly, I think it's an outdated rule that might have been appropriate a decade or two ago, but not anymore. And third, you don't want to take your new CEO and require him to already be planning his retirement, right? And so we changed it.
Okay, so you can stay as long as you want.
I can stay as long as I want at the board's blessing and my wife's support. We're in.
Okay, so the turnaround at Intel that you're trying to bring about, is that a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year kind of thing?
When we took the job, Linda and I said, this is a 5-year assignment to get it done. We think it's a couple of years to, rebuild, to get the strategy back, the execution back in place, to get it underway. We think it will be some amount of time to get the businesses back to unquestioned leadership. Some of the new businesses like the foundry business that we started, it's a 5-year assignment to get all of that well and healthy again. But we didn't set a timeline on it. Will it be done in 4? Maybe less than that? No way. Could it be 6, 7, 8 years that I'm CEO? Maybe, if we're having fun and I'm healthy and good, but it's a 5-year job.
So your last quarterly report, you reported that your revenues were up about 5% or so, but your stock went down. Is that frustrating when you do that?
What we did the last quarter is, we laid out to the street very clearly what it takes, and we're going to lower our margins, increase our CapEx significantly to build a manufacturing technology powerhouse. And on a quarterly basis, that's going to suck. And the financial markets rewarded us for that with about a 10% reduction in our stock price. And I was a very happy guy because my financial expectations are now meet, beat, raise for as long as I can see into the future. And they are consistent with the investment and business strategy that I've laid out. So if you want to measure me on a quarterly basis, I fail. If you want to measure me on a 2, 3, 4-year basis of turning around an industry and an iconic company, that's what I want to be measured against.
Okay, so in 2017, before you rejoined Intel, they bought a company called Mobileye, an Israeli company, for about $15 billion. It's now been reported in the press that you're going to take it public at a valuation of $50 billion. So what can you say about that?
Well, Mobileye is a killer company. I mean, and we would say there's only 2 companies in the world who can do leading edge autonomous technology: Tesla, Mobileye. And so this is a wonderful asset. We think that the autonomous vehicle and Mobileye, any of you have collision detection on your car? That is probably Mobileye, right? That's the technology inside of that. And they're moving from ADAS, as it's called, collision detection and avoidance, to autonomous vehicles. And they're now demonstrating that in multiple geographies, multiple car manufacturers. So we see it as an explosive time for the Mobileye technology. And really, while we're not a car manufacturer, we are the technology company, just like Intel does, that will make this available for all of the car manufacturers and really drive this into the industry. So very exciting time for it. But being part of Intel, and this is somewhat what EMC did with VMware, it's a very similar play. We said the market is not going to give us a multiple associated with a high growth category. So we're going to create, we're going to spin a portion of it available. We'll do an IPO. We'll maintain the majority of it to keep driving the synergies, but we're going to create a separate tradable entity around Mobileye.
Have you ever been in one of these autonomous driving cars yet?
About 10 times.
And you think they're going to be around?
Oh, it is so cool.
But do they really work?
Absolutely.
You wear a helmet when you're in those? Or?
Absolutely not.
No.
Right, as well. And I'll tell you, to me, it goes from mind-blowing to mundane, because you get in one of these things and then it's like, you took your hands off the steering wheel, hit a button. It's like, yeah, right, it's going to take us, right? In the first minute, you're just like, right. And then all of a sudden the car, it's adjusting lanes, it's slowing up, speeding down, detecting the light change and so on as you go on. And all of a sudden it's like, how are the kids doing? Right. It becomes mundane. It's of course the car's going to take, and we've now created the statistical and technical basis that the car is at least an order of magnitude better than the human drivers on that road. And we're able to statistically and regularly prove that to be the case. It is, fabulous at that level. It's learning the behaviors of those roads, right? It's learning from the other cars around it. It doesn't get distracted by texting. It doesn't, lose sight of how many drinks you've had the night before. It does the right thing on a order of magnitude better basis. And we're doing this in high volatile areas. I've driven them in Tel Aviv. Have you ever driven to Tel Aviv? Nobody there drives by the rules, right? It's a crazy environment. In Munich, Paris, it is really a fabulous experience.
Yesterday, you announced an acquisition of another company in Israel. You've made 6 acquisitions there in the last 5 years or so. So what is it about Israel that attracts Intel?
A number of years ago, and this is very early in the days of Intel, there was a famous engineer for Intel who invented what was the precursor to the flash memory. It was called the EEPROM. And he says, I'm moving back to Israel, Andy, and I'd like to start Intel Israel. And Andy said, no blanking way, right? And he left. And then he kept coming back. About every 3 months, he came back to Andy, and he says, I still like to start Intel Israel. And after about 9 months, Andy's, of getting harassed by him, he finally said, okay, we'll give it a try. Intel was the first multinational technology company to start in Israel. And so the love affair between Intel and Israel, is now almost 50 years long that this has been underway. And they are extraordinarily innovative, hardworking, and I love, one time during the Infantata, one of the teams there, I was on the phone call with them, and I was saying, well, maybe we should, given some of the noise that's going on and the concerns in the market, maybe we should move this project somewhere else. And I remember Avi Kaladny, the guy who was running the manufacturing, he says, we have fought 4 wars since we've been part of Intel, and we've never missed a commitment. Right? It's just that dogged determination that the people have, the confidence, the innovative, and it's a 1 degree of separation. Everybody knows each other, and they are going to make themselves successful. Just been a tremendous environment. And today, people have written books around the startup nation. So we love it. We've had great success there. We're the largest employer in the country. So, we really are, quite fond of that relationship.
But you're a committed Christian, and Jesus was born there, so that doesn't
hurt either.
Doesn't hurt either.
I don't mind going to the Holy Lands.
So let me ask you today: is it true that as I've read, that the computing power on the missions to the moon in the '60s were less than the computing power you have in your iPhone?
Yeah, it's about 100x greater what you carry in your pocket today than what took us to the moon and back.
Wow. Okay, so what next 5 years from today, what technology device am I going to have that's going to mesmerize me and make my life better?
Yeah, we think, I've called it the 4 superpowers, that you have ubiquitous compute. Compute will be in everything, right? As you see it to the future, that you'll have infrastructure that's scalable and distributed, right? So that you always have low latency, high bandwidth. So cloud and edge infrastructure. Everything will get connected, everybody and everything will get connected, and AI will be pervasive in everything. And these are the 4 superpowers that are going to drive every innovation. So you're going to walk up to your door, right? And it will recognize you, right? Let's say a fun little scenario here. Tomorrow morning, right? What time do you normally get up, David?
5:30.
Okay, 5:30. Tomorrow morning, your smart device wakes you up and says, David, time to wake up. Right? You look and it's 4:30, and your smart device will say, last night you had a heart irregularity. That's the 3rd heart irregularity that you've had over the last 30 days. That has now become a risk factor. So during the night, I up all of your biometrics to the cloud. I've compared it to everybody in your DNA type.
Right.
Last night, we've run the full synthesis, right, of that. We've already, pre-arranged for, right, your doctor's appointment today. All of the results will be there by the time you get to your doctor's appointment. We've loaded the directions to the doctor's appointment into the Mobileye-driven autonomous vehicle. I needed to get you up early because we're predicting a little bit of traffic on the way there today. So that's why I woke you up early. Sorry about that. I've moved your Starbucks order to the Starbucks on the way. And since we are going to the heart doctor, we made it decaf.
Geez, I don't know if I want this heart doctor part of it, but okay, so that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, these things, and again, you think about that, autonomous vehicles, will they be there? Absolutely. Will personalized medicine be there? Absolutely. Will, DNA driven, N of 1 medicines be possible? Yes, absolutely. Will you have, voice driven activation of technology? All of these things are going to come together over the next decade, driven by those 4 superpowers.
But you're obviously talented, your business, you're well known. Have you ever thought, if you went out and raised your own private equity fund in the technology area and got 20 or 30% of the profits, you might make more money?
I'm a company guy.
Oh.
I like working and scaling with people, and some people are driven to be entrepreneurs. I've always enjoyed big teams, big companies, big resources to affect global. The Intel mission statement, that we will improve the lives of every person on the planet. Right? How many companies can say that? I helped to, not only did I help microprocessor, I helped to create USB. I helped to create Wi-Fi, I helped to create many of the standards. I wrote the first net neutrality bill. These things, a scale company like Intel allows you to truly touch the lives of every human on the planet. And I'm not interested in financial gain. I just give it away.
So if the President of the United States called you, some president, and said, come in and be secretary of something and work on technology, you would say?
I'd have to get a divorce first.
Okay.
So in California, being in the political domain, there are other people here that are good at that.
Okay.
I like to build things. I like to run companies. I like to innovate technologies and products. I want to be, associated with working on a piece of technology that touches the life of every human on the planet in every reality of life. That's what I want to do.
Did your parents live to see your success?
My father just passed away September 4th.
So he must have been very impressed with what you achieved.
And just with mom for Thanksgiving. And they would always say they love all of their kids. But I knew I was the oldest boy in a German farming family. I was always special.
Did they ever call you with advice about how to run Intel or something like that?
Of course they would give me advice. Pat, the stock is down today. What'd you do? Right.
And what do your grandchildren call you?
Papa.
And do you give them technology advice, or they don't need it?
So my little granddaughter Alice, every time she plugs in a USB device, she says, "Thanks, Papa."
Wow, that's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
Thank you very much for an interesting conversation.